I look upon the 4 years next to come as a dreadful, self-inflicted penance for the good of my country. I could see no pleasure in it and no satisfaction, only a hope that I may be of service to the people.
Those are the words of Grover Cleveland, our 22nd president and the subject of this, the 22nd episode of the Dead Presidents Podcast. Welcome to the Dead Presidents Podcast. I am James Shea Hamilton.
And I'm Stephen Lincoln Douglas.
And we're coming at you with a whole lot of Grover Cleveland, our 22nd president.
That's right. A hefty dose of S. Grover Cleveland. Because his name wasn't Grover. He decided to adopt that name. His given name, Stephen Grover Cleveland, born the 18th of March, 1837 in Caldwell, New Jersey, the fifth of 9 children, born to Anne Neal Cleveland, a Baltimore native of Irish and German ancestry, and Richard Cleveland, a Presbyterian minister who graduated from Yale and Princeton Theological Seminary. The first Clevelands had immigrated from England to Massachusetts in 1634. Grover Cleveland's great-great-grandfather was a friend of Benjamin Franklin, and another ancestor, Moses Cleveland, helped establish the town of Cleveland, Ohio, which was named after him.
Yep. Long, storied ancestry.
Now, wait a second, is that right? Moses Cleveland's name had an A in it.
Yeah.
And they had to leave it off, and...
Yeah, those older Clevelands they had an A in their name, and so did the town of Cleveland, Ohio, for a while.
Most interesting.
Yeah. Yep, Cleveland's father, Richard, earned a pretty bare-bones salary as a minister. Family moved around frequently as he took jobs with different congregations. In Caldwell, New Jersey, his predecessor was Reverend Stephen Grover, and that's who he named his son after, the future president. When he was 4 years old, the family moved to Fayetteville in upstate New York. The Cleveland children were subjected to strict discipline and taught the value of industriousness, but also had time to play and enjoy the outdoors. They spent Sundays at worship and at Sunday school. Young Stephen Grover, known to his friends as Big Steve, was a fun-loving child who loved fishing. Become a lifelong hobby of his.
Indeed. And Big Steve is going to attend Fayetteville Academy, where he studies mathematics and Latin. When he was 14, his family moved to Clinton, New York, where he attended Clinton Liberal Academy and prepared to enter Hamilton College, where his older brother William studied. However, the family could not afford to send him to college, and instead he was placed in a 2-year apprenticeship as a store clerk.
Well, he hopes that he's going to get a chance to go to college upon completion of his apprenticeship, but then his father died, and he had to go to work to help support the family. He would never attend college, and years later, when he spoke at Harvard, he said, quote, "The reflection that for me there is no alma mater gives rise to a feeling of regret." His brother William would hire him as an assistant teacher at the New York Institute for the Blind in New York City. He spent a year or so there until 1855, when he prevailed upon a family friend to lend him $25 to travel to Cleveland, Ohio, to study law. But he never made it that far.
No, not quite. On his way to Cleveland, he stops in Buffalo, where his uncle Lewis Allen is a man pretty well connected in the community.
Yep.
Allen got his nephew the opportunity to study law with Rogers, Bowen and Rogers, a prestigious law firm where Millard Fillmore had once worked. Cleveland read law there and would be admitted to the New York bar in 1859. The members of the Rogers firm were Democrats, and Cleveland became involved in the Democratic Party. He worked toward the election of the party's 1856 presidential nominee, James Buchanan, before he was even old enough to vote. By 1862, he was elected as a ward supervisor.
Yep, he's coming up. He practiced law at the Rogers firm for 3 years, during which time Civil War broke out.
That's it.
Cleveland, is he going to sign up as so many presidents we've gone over? Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, all doing their part. Not to mention Grant, of course.
Yes.
But Cleveland, his older brother William was a minister, became a minister like their father. He doesn't make much money. And a couple of his younger brothers join up in the army. Grover is financially supporting his mother and his younger sisters.
That's right.
And he feels like it would be a financial disaster for them were he to join the army.
And there's kind of a legal way to avoid service.
Yeah, the draft has been instituted, but there is the loophole of finding a substitute.
That's it. And if you can afford it, you could buy your way out of service.
Yep. That's what Cleveland did. He paid $150, which was about $3,300 in today's money, to George Beninsky, a Polish immigrant who took his place in the draft. Beninsky would survive his service in the war, and Cleveland would continue to thrive in the practice of law.
Yeah, it'd be a much more sordid tale if George Beninsky had perished in battle. Because, well,
you might not have a President Cleveland if the other party could have waved George Beninsky's bloody shirt during the campaign.
That's it.
But he made it through just fine.
He did. In 1863, Cleveland became Assistant District Attorney for Erie County, an office in which he made many high-level connections. The elected district attorney was an older man who didn't take a very hands-on approach to the office, and Cleveland did most of the work and served as the de facto DA. Yeah, he's going to be working long hours. He's going to be staying up most nights, preparing his cases. And in 1865, local Democrats are going to nominate him for district attorney, but in a heavily Republican district, he's going to lose the election by a narrow margin to his own roommate, Republican Lyman Bass, a future congressman.
Yep.
Ouch.
Well, I'm sure it was a friendly campaign.
Yeah.
Indeed it was. But Cleveland, he's still on his way up. He's going to form a law partnership with Isaac Vanderpoel for a few years until Vanderpoel is elected to public office. Then Cleveland is going to join up with Albert Laning and Oscar Folsom to create the firm Laning, Folsom, and Cleveland. Then in 1870, Cleveland is going to run for sheriff of Erie County. He's going to win that election by a pretty comfortable margin.
That's right, and as sheriff, his duties are going to include serving warrants and dispossession notices, as well as presiding over executions. He's going to conduct several executions during his 2-year term, standing on the gallows and personally pulling the lever that sent the convicts to death by hanging. Later, political opponents would dub him the Buffalo Hangman.
Yeah, he had the option of paying someone else a small sum to do that part of the job.
But he already did that in the Civil War, so he wasn't about to repeat himself.
Yeah, he stuck in there and did it himself. And despite that unpleasant aspect of the job, the office of sheriff did enable Cleveland to collect a variety of fees associated with his duties, which over his 2-year term amounted to as much as $40,000, which is well nigh almost $1 million today.
Yeah, quite a chunk of change.
It's kind of part of the attraction of that office for him.
Indeed.
Is he could make some nice money in it.
Oh, he's making bank.
Yeah. When his term expires, he leaves office with a reputation for diligent public service, and he is now a pretty well-known and well-respected man throughout the city of Buffalo. Goes back to the practice of law, forming a new partnership with Wilson Bissell and Lyman Bass, who is now in Congress. Bass will leave the firm due to ill health and be replaced by George Sicard. Cleveland, Bissell, and Sicard becomes a very successful law firm. Cleveland now able to charge increasingly high fees for his legal services.
Absolutely. However, Cleveland's poor upbringing instills in him an instinct for frugality, and he lives a pretty simple bachelor's life. He saves a good deal of his income. He likes to unwind after a hard day's work, and he frequents many of Buffalo's German beer halls where he enjoys sausages, sauerkraut, thick stews, and immense cuts of meats, not to mention stein after stein of beer. When he ran against his friend Lyman Bass in the 1865 district attorney's race, the two candidates agreed to limit themselves to 4 glasses of beer per day throughout the course of the campaign. However, they soon found a loophole and began using 48-ounce tankards.
Yeah. Now that's the kind of friendly campaign you run against your roommate.
Yeah.
Where you're just pounding beer the whole time.
Hey, we're drinking too much. We need to cut back to like 4 beers a day. Hey, check out these glasses I got.
Yeah.
We could have those 4 beers in.
Yeah, I think I did the math. 4 48-ounce tankards would be like 16 cans of beer a day. So it's like, hey, we're running for DA.
We need to slow it
We
down.
need to cut down to 16 beers a day.
Yeah. It's a ludicrous amount of alcohol.
Well,
And there's many more stories.
in one story, Cleveland and a fellow attorney were brawling on the streets of Buffalo before they shook hands and patched things up over a beer. Another story, when Cleveland was sheriff, he was drinking in a bar late one night when he noticed that the bar owner had fallen asleep. So Cleveland set the clock forward, woke up the owner, and cited him for staying open past legal operating hours. And he waited until after the owner flipped out to reveal the prank.
Wow.
He knows how to have a good time,
Indeed.
old Cleveland.
That's right. And though Cleveland is going to remain a bachelor, he does not necessarily remain a virgin. And he has at least one liaison that we will discuss later when it becomes an issue during the future presidential election campaign.
Yeah, most presidents, once they start coming up in their career, that's the part where we start talking about how they got married and started a family. Not Cleveland. I think around this time
Indeed.
he's asked, his sisters ask him if he's going to get married, and he says, yeah, I've thought about it. The more I think about it, the less I think I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
He's enjoying being unattached. And 1875, following the death of his friend and former partner, Oscar Folsom, Cleveland is named as administrator of his estate, and he will maintain a close relationship with Mrs. Folsom and her daughter Frances. Another topic that will come up later.
That's right. Oscar Folsom, Cleveland's business partner for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And old Mrs. Folsom and their young daughter Frances.
Yep.
Names to be remembered. But as it is, it's 1881, and the Democratic Party has nominated Grover Cleveland as its candidate for mayor of Buffalo. Is he going by Grover at this point?
Yeah, I think
probably.
Yeah, I think sometime around, once he starts establishing himself in his career, he starts wanting to be called Grover.
Yeah.
Yeah, he'd been, 1881. It's now almost a decade since he'd been sheriff. Democratic Party of Buffalo looking around for somebody who can run for mayor, and Cleveland's pretty well known, pretty well respected. He got a lot of kind of cross-party support when he was sheriff, and the Democrats are thinking they can do the same thing with running him for mayor.
That's it, and I think we would be remiss if we did not say that the city government was mired in corruption by both political parties.
Mm-hmm.
Cleveland, he's a proponent of civil service reform.
Yep. It's the most pressing issue of the day.
Indeed it is, especially after what happened to President Garfield the previous year, when a disappointed office seeker had shot him in the back.
Yep.
And then he was brutally murdered by his own doctor.
Yep. You guys will recall that from episode 20. But Cleveland can carry the banner of civil service reform, and that's going to help him in the election for mayor, which he's going to win by a pretty wide margin and be inaugurated on January 1st, 1882. He argues that the city should be run with the efficiency of a business, and that party affiliation should play no role in determining the city's workforce. He's going to start running the city like a business.
That's it.
City offices close at 4 p.m. Grover Cleveland's like, what is this? No business, private business, would close their doors at 4 p.m. and consider a day's work done. You're going to stay open till 5 p.m.
Yeah.
He's getting some more efficiency out of the public money right off the bat.
That's it. He vetoes a street cleaning bill passed by the city council, which awarded a street cleaning contract to a politically connected bidder while passing on a lower bid that would have saved the city $100,000. He suspected that the bid amount was inflated in order to provide graft payments to city council members, targeting corruption.
Yep.
His veto message stated, quote, "I regard it as the culmination of a most barefaced, impudent, and shameless scheme to betray the interests of the people and to worse than squander the public money."
Cleveland
Worse than squander.
He's throwing down the gauntlet.
Indeed.
Standing up to the city council and gaining a lot of fans in the process. He is also going to successfully propose a commission to develop plans for a new city sewage system at a much lesser cost than previously contemplated. His actions winning the admiration of voters and earning him the ire of machine politicians used to suckling at the public teat, particularly the Tammany Hall machine of his own Democratic Party.
That's it. Grover Cleveland is going to state a simple philosophy. Quote, "Good and pure government lies at the foundation of the wealth and progress of every community." Within the first year in office as mayor, a movement began to nominate him for governor of New York. Not too shabby.
No.
Pretty quick rise for the hangman of Buffalo.
Indeed.
Old Big Steve has now become Grover Cleveland.
Indeed. Now, 1882, the two leading candidates for the Democratic gubernatorial nomination were both members of the House of Representatives, Wall Street financier Roswell Flower and Civil War hero General Henry Slocum. But Cleveland's impeccable civil service reform credentials are catching the eye of Daniel Manning, powerful newspaper editor who served as chairman of the New York Democratic Party.
That's it. And at the Democratic State Convention, Cleveland comes in third place on the first ballot, but as voting continues, he starts picking up more and more support and eventually emerges as the compromise candidate for the nomination. Now, the incumbent Republican governor, Alonzo Cornell, had been a member of the Conkling political machine, and he served alongside future President Chet Arthur in the New York Customs House before he and Arthur were both fired by President Hayes. Let's not forget, he gave him the shit can.
Yep. But as governor, Alonzo Cornell will embrace civil service reform and thereby lose the support of his old machine. And that machine is going to prevent his renomination and instead nominate Treasury Secretary Charles Folger on the Republican ticket as Cleveland's opponent.
Yeah.
But
perhaps Cornell and Arthur both tried to redeem themselves.
Well, that sounds like a state Republican Party in disarray, and Cleveland is going to take advantage of that and beat Folger in the general election by a crushing margin. He received 535,000 votes against only 342,000 for Folger. That margin of victory, 192,000, was the largest in the history of New York State.
Wow.
Democrats also win a majority of the state legislature. Meanwhile, Republicans in the state assembly elect as their minority leader a young reformer named Theodore Roosevelt.
That's it.
So, Grover Cleveland is heading up to Albany.
Yes, he is.
Big rise from private attorney to mayor of Buffalo. Now he's governor of New York.
That's it, and we're going to see how he handles that task right after this word from our sponsors. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Allen's Cocaine Tablets for hay fever, catarrh, and throat troubles. Allen's Cocaine Tablets cure neuralgia, nervousness, headache, and sleeplessness. They only cost 50 cents a box and are available at your local druggist or by mail. Send your correspondence to Allen Cocaine Manufacturing Company at 1254 Broadway, New York City. Listeners, are you wallowing in the grips of hay fever? Not to worry, pop a couple of Allen's Cocaine Tablets and that hay fever will be blown to smithereens. And that's not all. Allen's Cocaine Tablets cure a whole list of other ailments. I can't believe I've never heard of this newfangled cocaine before. Is it some kind of miracle drug, James?
This just in, we have a breaking news update. The New York Times has just published a report on the subject of cocaine. A remedy for many ills. Recent publications on the subject of cocaine and the various therapeutic uses to which it can be put have caused a widespread demand for this valuable drug. The new uses to which cocaine has been applied with success in New York include hay fever, catarrh, and toothache, and it is now being experimented with in cases of seasickness. The doctors say cocaine is bound to be a blessing for that source of horrible annoyance so easy to obtain and so hard to get rid of, a cold in the head. Hereafter, public speakers, singers, and actors will not be permitted to plead cold in the head as an excuse for disappointing their audiences.
No, indeed.
All will be given to understand that cocaine will cure the worst cold in the head ever heard of. If a man exclaims that he has a toothache, as only a man who has a toothache can exclaim, somebody at his elbow will shout, "Rub cocaine on it!" Or if a child has an earache, cotton and laudanum will be forgotten as its mother asks for the cocaine jar. It is a universal medical belief that many blessings will yet result from experimenting with cocaine.
There you have it, listeners. If the New York Times is saying it, it must be true. I gotta be honest. While you were reading that news update, I downed a handful of Allen's Cocaine Tablets. I had a bit of a headache when we started the episode, but right now, I can't even remember what a headache is. I feel better than I ever have in my entire life. It's official. Cocaine is fucking awesome. The doctors are saying it's a cure-all. Moms are giving it to their kids, and I'm going to be taking it for literally everything. What could go wrong? Allen's Cocaine Tablets are a godsend. At just 50 cents a box, you can't afford not to use cocaine. That's a message from our sponsor, Allen's Cocaine Tablets.
We're also proud to be sponsored by the dentist office of Johnson & Harris, who hereby solicit the patronage of citizens throughout the county. They are prepared to visit those living at a distance who cannot conveniently come to their office to have work done. Nitrous oxide gas or cocaine will be given for the painless extraction of teeth. Listeners, are you suffering from a toothache? Let Johnson & Harris come over and rub some cocaine on it. You don't even have to leave the comfort of your own home. Johnson & Harris will come to your house and give you so much cocaine that they'll be able to rip your teeth out of your skull without you even noticing. Welcome to the future of dentistry. That's a message from our sponsors, the dentist office of Johnson & Harris.
And now, a message from our sponsor, the State Steamship Line. The State Steamship Line will travel from New York to Glasgow and Belfast with tickets available at reduced rates. Its passenger accommodations are unsurpassed. Cabin passage is available for $35 or $40 depending on the location of your stateroom. Steerage is available to and from Europe at the lowest rates. Reserve your tickets through the booking agents, Alston Baldwin and Company at number 53 Broadway. Listeners, we know you've always wanted to sail to Europe, and we know what's been holding you back. The fear of getting seasick. But now that cocaine is available to cure seasickness, there is literally nothing stopping you from enjoying the European vacation of your dreams. The waves may be tossing and turning, but you'll be so hopped up on cocaine you won't even realize you're on a boat. You'll be practically flying to Europe on wings of cocaine. Glasgow and Belfast await. That's a message from our sponsor, the State Steamship Line.
And now, back to the show.
And we're back. And Big Steve, Grover Cleveland, Governor of New York. In his inaugural address, he calls for a state income tax and states that, quote, all unnecessary offices should be abolished and all employment of doubtful benefit discontinued. During his first 2 months in office, he vetoes 8 bills and earns the nickname the Veto Governor. The vetoed bills, they're mostly pork barrel spending. But Cleveland also vetoes a pretty popular bill that is to set a maximum fare of 5 cents for railroad travel. He argues that the bill violates the Contracts Clause of the U.S. Constitution, which held that no state may pass any law, quote, impairing the obligation of contracts.
That's right. Young Theodore Roosevelt, who had voted for the bill out of a desire to stick it to wealthy railroad barons, reversed his position and agreed with Cleveland. Roosevelt and others who joined him prevented Cleveland's veto from being overridden. And on the same grounds, Cleveland vetoed a bill to set maximum working day hours for streetcar conductors. He also supported the establishment of a Bureau of Labor Statistics and a bill to regulate the cigar industry. Roosevelt had promoted the bill after investigating the poor working conditions of cigar-making operations inside tenement houses, which often employed child labor. Cleveland was known for his pro-business policies, but he also pledged support for the working man, saying, quote, the laboring classes constitute the main part of our population. They should be protected in their efforts to assert their rights when endangered by aggregated capital, and all statutes on the subject should recognize the care of the state for honest toil and be framed with a view of improving the conditions of the working man.
That's right, Cleveland, looking out for the working man. He also warned against the unchecked power of corporations, which would become a major national issue in years to come, saying, quote, it is a grave question whether the formation of these artificial bodies ought not to be checked or better regulated, and in some way supervised. At any rate, they should always be kept well in hand, and the funds of its citizens should be protected by the state which has invited their investment. Immense salaries are paid to officers, transactions are consummated by which the directors make money while the rank and file among stockholders lose it. The honest investor waits for dividends and the directors grow rich. It is suspected, too, that large sums are spent under various disguises in efforts to influence legislation. Now, Cleveland, he's going to propose an auditing board that would scrutinize corporations and protect shareholders' interests. He's already earned the hatred of Tammany Hall, the big political machine in New York.
Yep. Well, he especially earns its hatred when he sends out a letter arguing against the re-election of Thomas Grady, one of Tammany's most notoriously corrupt politicians, to his seat in the state senate. That letter ends up getting published and leading to Grady's defeat. Cleveland's actions as governor alienating some members of his own party, particularly the Tammany Hall machine, but he's gained some supporters among Republican reformers like Theodore Roosevelt, who sponsored a bill creating a state civil service commission, which Cleveland signed that bill and appointed some prominent reformers to make up the commission. He also signed some bills sponsored by Roosevelt to reform New York City's government to limit the corrupt power of machine bosses. Cleveland supported conservation legislation to protect the land around Niagara Falls, helping it to become a major tourist destination.
That's it. As governor, Cleveland, total workaholic. He's putting in long hours, and he's usually going at it 7 days a week. Occasionally, he's going to go fishing, or he's going to host a friendly game of poker with a 25-cent betting limit.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, he's taking his job pretty seriously.
Indeed he is.
Seeing himself as there to protect the public interest. When the legislature's passing bills, he's reading them very carefully, making very deliberate decisions about whether he's going to sign them or veto them, and he's not afraid to stand up to anybody in his way.
That's it. Let's talk about Cleveland's relationship with Teddy Roosevelt a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Now, these guys become something of a little bit of a duo, so to speak. Kind of a cross-party lines partnership.
Yeah.
Known as the Big One and the Dude.
Yeah. Cleveland, he's the big one. He's quite a big man. Teddy Roosevelt, at the time known for his going out west to work in the ranches, called the Dude somewhat dismissively by his critics. But
that's it. He's got his Western garb, but he's got Tiffany cufflinks.
Yep. Yeah, they both worked together on a lot of things, particularly aimed at machine politics, and got a lot of stuff done.
Indeed. And that's going to lead us to 1884.
Yeah.
Now,
this is just 2 years after Cleveland became mayor of Buffalo.
Right. Just 2 years. But Cleveland's being spoken of as a potential presidential nominee, and that's before he's even sworn in as governor. New York, the nation's most populous and economically important state. Its electoral votes, as we've talked about time and again, the decisive advantage in presidential elections. Democrats nominating New York governors in 1868 and 1876, with Samuel Tilden winning the popular vote despite losing the Electoral College to Rutherford Hayes. Now, Cleveland's civil service record and his reputation for honesty and integrity only add to his attraction as a candidate.
That's right. One backer said that his supporters loved him because of the enemies he had made.
Yeah.
Meaning the machine politicians. So he's, governor of New York, and the Democrats are thinking You know, that's the best office you can send someone up to run for president from. It's the most important state to win in a presidential election. And they've got a great reform candidate sitting in governor of New York, and with very little effort on his part, he goes into the
With
Democratic...
little, no effort.
Yeah, he doesn't do really anything. He's the clear front runner going into the Democratic National Convention in Chicago in July 1884. Other top candidates including Delaware Senator Thomas Bayard, former Ohio Senator Alan Thurman, Indiana Senator Joseph McDonald, Pennsylvania Representative Samuel Randall. You need a 2/3 majority of 547 delegates to win the nomination. On the first ballot, Cleveland got 392 votes against 170 for Bayard, 88 for Thurman, 78 for Randall, 56 for McDonald. The convention adjourned until the following morning. Overnight, some anti-Cleveland delegates tried to organize a movement to support former Indiana Governor Thomas Hendricks as a compromise candidate. But Daniel Manning, who was the leader of the New York delegation, became aware of the plot, got Cleveland supporters out of bed early and on the floor, ready to counter their opponents.
That's just it. Indiana is going to shift its support to Hendricks, but Pennsylvania's favorite son, Randall, withdrew in favor of Cleveland, and he won the nomination on the second ballot with a whopping 683 votes.
It's pretty incredible.
It really is.
We've talked about a lot of conventions at the time.
The mayor, just a year ago.
Yeah.
Freshly elected governor of New York, and now a nominee for the presidency.
Yeah, and only on the second ballot.
That's it.
We talked about a lot of conventions around these
We certainly
years.
have, and these compromise candidates,
Dozens
James
of
Polk,
ballots.
James Garfield, and all the ballots and the machinations that go on. Cleveland pretty much just waltzes into it.
Well, that's the record that he had built for himself in such a short time. Very impressive.
Indeed it is, and the convention is going to settle on Thomas Hendricks as the vice presidential nominee. So you got a Cleveland Hendricks ticket on the second ballot here. Grover Cleveland, what a meteoric rise.
Yep. And who's he going to go up against? Well, the Republican nominee is former Speaker of the House, Senator, and Secretary of State James G. Blaine of Maine, who is running for president again in 1884, despite having promised President Garfield that he would give up his presidential aspirations in exchange for being named Secretary of State.
Well, he figures Garfield's dead. There's no need to honor that promise.
Right. Blaine had unsuccessfully sought the Republican nomination in 1876 and 1880.
That's it. You know, Blaine, James G. Blaine, continental liar from the state of Maine.
Well,
so
that's what they say about him, because they're
the
not...
Democrats will say...
Well, some members of the kind of Teddy Roosevelt reform wing of the Republican Party will say that as well. Because there are not a lot of real hot-button national policy differences between the two parties at this time.
Right.
The party platforms, you know, not really providing that difference. So this campaign is going to it's going to get personal between the two candidates.
That's it. Like, we are kind of at a point where most of them are almost on the same page with the hot button issues. Mm-hmm. And it does come down to personality. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see that repeated.
Yep. Well, you got Democrats. They're going to remind voters of the scandal that derailed Blaine's 1876 campaign, allegations that he received huge payments for worthless railroad bonds, supposedly in exchange for exercising his influence in Congress on the railroad's behalf. He denied any wrongdoing, but he had written, quote, "burn this letter," in various correspondence related to these dealings.
That's it. Yeah. Pretty self-incriminating.
Yep, doesn't
That
sound
seems.
good.
But the reform faction of Republicans, they're known as the Mugwumps. And they believe Blaine is the embodiment of everything wrong with the spoils system. They are deeply dismayed by his nomination, and they're going to contribute to the attacks against him.
Yeah, a lot of them think, look, reform, civil service reform is the big issue right now, and we're going to nominate this Blaine guy who has a long history of allegations of corruption. Well, what are they going to say about Cleveland? Well, he didn't serve in the Civil War.
That's it.
He
Let's
paid
go
for
back
a
to the Civil War.
Well, the Republicans aren't going to make that much of an issue out of it because Blaine didn't serve in the military either. So it's not like they can say, hey, our guy's a war hero and your guy dodged the draft.
Yeah.
Neither of them fought in the war. Cleveland did have to write a letter explaining, his reasons for getting a draft substitute, but it didn't really become too much of a thing. Democrats allege that Blaine and his wife were not yet married at the time their first child was born.
Oh, they're going to say that they had a bastard child.
Yeah?
Whew.
Well, let's hope a bastard child is not disqualifying, because
Yeah.
Republicans have a bombshell allegation of their own about Cleveland.
Right, like hopefully that allegation's not going to come back and bite him in the ass.
Yeah, well, pretty soon after Cleveland got the nomination, some stuff started getting published in Buffalo,
Indeed it did.
claiming that in 1874, Cleveland had seduced a widow named Maria Halpin, impregnated her, reneged on a promise to marry her, and forced her to commit the child to an orphan asylum and forced her to leave town.
Holy shit.
Opponents spreading further rumors that Cleveland was a notorious whoremonger with many victims, and making other wild charges like the claim that when his friend Oscar Folsom died in a horse and buggy accident, a drunken Cleveland had been driving.
Wow. That's really something.
Yeah.
And when Cleveland's friends ask him how to answer the charges, he responds with a simple telegram. Quote, "Whatever you do, tell the truth." Now, perhaps that's telling. In Cleveland's account, he was, quote, guilty of an illicit connection with Maria Halpin, but there was, quote, no seduction, no adultery, no breach of promise, no obligation of marriage. Though he had doubts about the child's paternity, Cleveland agreed to provide financial support. However, when he had his friend Judge Roswell Burroughs look into the matter, Burroughs learned that Halpin was drinking heavily and neglecting the child. He ensured that Halpin was temporarily admitted to a mental asylum and had the child committed to an orphan asylum, where Cleveland paid for the room and board. He also helped Halpin get a job in Niagara Falls, but she later kidnapped the boy from the orphanage. And again, lost custody.
Yep, the boy was adopted by a wealthy family, later grew up to be a doctor, and though Cleveland never threw his friends under the bus, others reported that the reason Cleveland doubted the child's paternity was that Halpin had slept with several other married men who were Cleveland's friends. The child's name was said to be Oscar Folsom Cleveland, and it was said that Cleveland agreed to accept responsibility because he was unmarried and could thus protect Oscar Folsom.
That's right, the rest of these fellas were married. And as for Maria Halpin,
Well,
let's turn to Theo Kojak for his thoughts. She was a good girl. Mama's apple pie on the 4th of July. She was a hooker!
you can't verify that. Well, during this campaign, Cleveland is going to be viciously mocked for this affair. Republicans are going to popularize the chant, "Ma, Ma, where's my pa?" That's what they're going to come after him with. These allegations are going to be heavily investigated. 16 prominent Buffalo Republicans will publish a report stating that the attacks on Cleveland's private character are wholly untrue and have been positively proved to be false.
And that's it. And that's Republicans.
Yep.
Now, on the eve of the election, Democratic newspapers published an affidavit purportedly signed by Maria Halpin in which she stated that Cleveland had sex with her, quote, by use of force and violence without my consent. Cleveland is going to later state of those who, quote, defiled themselves by spreading this scandal, quote, I don't believe God will ever forgive them, and I am determined not to do so.
Cleveland not a fan of these allegations.
Indeed not, and how is this going to affect the election? Well, as the campaign approaches Election Day, Blaine is going to give over 400 speeches in 6 weeks, while Cleveland, he makes just a handful of public appearances. An issue that was perhaps more important than the personal mudslinging was the issue of Catholic voters, James.
That's right. Catholics, especially Irish and German immigrants, were traditionally Democratic voters, but Blaine felt he could make inroads among Catholics, in part because his mother had been Catholic and his sister was a nun. However, a few days before the election, Blaine addressed a meeting of Protestant clergymen in New York where he was introduced by Reverend Samuel Burchard, who called Democrats the party of, quote, rum, Romanism, and rebellion.
That's it. Rum, Romanism, and rebellion.
Cleveland's campaign assured that the remark was widely circulated, and it cost Blaine significant support among Catholic voters.
That's it. Blaine's also going to speak at a dinner held by 200 rich capitalists, which political cartoonists lampooned as, quote, the royal feast of Belshazzar Blaine and the Money Kings.
Not a good look for Blaine a couple days before the election. And when all the votes are counted, Grover Cleveland emerged as the victor in a close contest. He won the Electoral College 219 to 182, including the once again decisive 36 electoral votes of New York, which Cleveland won by less than 1,200 votes out of more than 1 million votes cast.
That's right. Less than 1,200 votes.
Razor thin. Nationwide, over 10 million votes were cast, Cleveland winning the popular vote by 58,000. He's going to become the first Democrat to win the presidency since James Buchanan in 1856, and Democrats now had a rejoinder to the Republican chant, Ma, ma, where's my pa?
Gone to the White House. Ha, ha, ha. And we're going to see how Grover Cleveland handles himself at the White House.
Right after these messages. The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by Duffy's Tower Mint Cure, an invaluable tonic for females. Duffy's Tower Mint Cure secures and establishes regularity of the menstrual functions, relieving pain and distress. It is an invaluable aid to nursing mothers in the discharge of maternal duties without fatigue. The troubles of pregnancy, including faintness, melancholy, and morning sickness, are alleviated and cured. Tower Mint Cure ensures safety in the change of life, and by assimilating with the blood is distributed through every vein and strengthens every organ. It is prepared in accordance with medical laws, Duffy's pure malt whiskey and mint being of the ingredients, and ingeniously combines the best recognized curative agencies. Price $1 per bottle. Ladies, Duffy's Tower Mint Cure is the tonic you've been waiting for. Whether you're pregnant or nursing, menstrual or menopausal, Tower Mint Cure will relieve the symptoms that harass women at all stages of life. A healthy dose of mint and pure malt whiskey is exactly what every pregnant woman needs to overcome morning sickness and ensure the birth of a healthy child. If you're nursing, Tower Mint Cure will give your breast milk a little extra kick. And if it's that time of the month, or you're in the debilitating grips of the change of life, Tower Mint Cure simply makes your pain disappear. For the price of just $1, you can afford to drink multiple bottles a day. That's a message from our sponsor, Duffy's Tower Mint Cure.
We're also proud to be sponsored by Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, which publishes the following advice to mothers. Are you disturbed at night and broken of your rest by a sick child suffering and crying with pain of cutting teeth? If so, send at once and get a bottle of Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup for children teething. Its value is incalculable. It will relieve the poor little sufferer immediately. Depend upon it, mothers. There is no mistake about it. It cures dysentery and diarrhea, regulates the stomach and bowels, cures wind colic, softens the gums, reduces inflammation, and gives tone and energy to the whole system. Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup for children teething is pleasant to the taste, and is the prescription of one of the oldest and best female physicians and nurses in the United States. It is for sale by druggists throughout the world for the price of 25 cents a bottle. Be sure and ask for Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup and take no other kind. Moms, if you love your kids, you won't hesitate to give them Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. Why does Mrs. Winslow's work so well? Its two primary ingredients are morphine and alcohol. Now, it doesn't say that on the label, so let's make that our little secret. But with that in mind, it's easy to see how your Rugrats symptoms would be blasted into oblivion. And if Mrs. Winslow's doesn't do the trick, you can always follow the advice of the New York Times and give the little tyke some cocaine. Either way, your child won't be feeling a goddamn thing. That's a message from our sponsor, Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup.
Now an important message from our sponsor, Parker's Tonic, a pure family medicine that never intoxicates. If you are a lawyer, minister, or businessman exhausted by mental strain or anxious cares, do not take intoxicating stimulants, but use Parker's Tonic, a pure family medicine that never intoxicates. Sold by all druggists in large bottles for $1. Listeners, are you sick and tired of hearing about medicines that promise to heal your ailments only by employing intoxicating stimulants? Would you like to be relieved of illness and still be able to go about your day with a clear head? Then Parker's Tonic is the medicine for you. It will take care of your symptoms without getting you fucked up. That's the Parker's Tonic guarantee. I mean, some of these medicines are downright ridiculous. An alcoholic tonic for pregnant ladies, a children's medicine made with morphine, not to mention all the cocaine we were advertising.
No, wait just a sod-buggering minute, James. I shall ask you to wait, and if you refuse, by God, I shall ask you a second time. I'll be damned if I'm going to sit here and listen while you say something bad about cocaine. Pro tip for our listeners. If you crush Alan's cocaine tablets into powder and snort them up your nose, they work way faster. I feel like $1 million, which is enough money to buy 2 million boxes of Alan's cocaine tablets. That's a message from our sponsor, Alan's Cocaine Tablets.
No, this is a message from our sponsor, Parker's Tonic, a pure family medicine that never intoxicates. A tonic you can take if you have something to do today, like record a podcast.
A tonic for squares?
That's a message from our sponsor, Parker's Tonic. And now, back to the show. And we're back. Grover Cleveland about to become 22nd president of the United States.
That's right. And Grover Cleveland, He had actually never been to Washington before he arrived for his inauguration.
Yep, his meteoric rise so quick. He has no background in national politics.
That's it.
Pretty confined to New York. But now he's going to step out on the biggest stage.
Indeed he is. He's going to be sworn in on a Bible given to him by his late mother. And his imposing physique is going to impress a reporter from Cleveland, Ohio, from a particular newspaper who wrote, quote, "What a big man President Cleveland is. He must weigh nearly 300 pounds. He is 6 feet tall, has a great width of shoulder, and his flesh, unlike that of most fat men, is solid, not flabby."
Wow. President Cleveland impressing people with his girth.
Indeed, a great bull of a man.
Yep. He would be the fattest president as of the time he takes office.
Yes, and I believe that same newspaper writer reported that he was even more deeply moved by Cleveland's golden thighs. It's quite unusual a remark.
Cleveland delivered his inaugural address without notes, speaking flawlessly from memory, a, quote, spectacle that amazed the crowd.
Something not seen since Franklin Pierce.
Yep.
Delivering an inaugural address from memory.
He mostly stated general principles rather than policy details such as, quote, "The people demand reform in the administration of the government and the application of business principles to public affairs."
That's it.
Cleveland going to do what he did in Buffalo and in the New York governorship.
That's right.
On a national scale.
Yep, that's going to bring us to appointments. Cleveland's background enables him to come into office not owing any favors or being beholden to any interest groups. He's able to appoint a talented cabinet that underwent very little turnover during his 4-year term. As Secretary of State, he names one of his top rivals at the convention, Delaware Senator Thomas Bayard. As Treasury Secretary, he chooses New York Democratic Party Chairman Daniel Manning. Wall Street lawyer William Whitney is named Navy Secretary. 2 Southern senators and former Confederates, Lucius Lamar and Augustus Garland, are named Interior Secretary and Attorney General.
That's right. Wisconsin lawyer William Vilas named Postmaster General and later became Interior Secretary when Cleveland appointed Lucius Lamar to the Supreme Court. Vice President Thomas Hendricks died in the first year of his term, and there remained no constitutional mechanism to fill the vacancy.
That's right. I mean, our listeners are going to remember, James Madison went through this. We've had a couple people go through. The vice president dies. Man, there's just a gap.
Pretty common. Hendricks going to be maybe the 5th vice president to die in office.
Yep.
Well, there's one position that Cleveland will fill, and that would be the position of White House hostess. What is the bachelor president going to do? Well, he's going to call upon his unmarried sister, Rose Cleveland. Rose is an intellectual who wrote scholarly books about literature. She is not very interested in socializing or entertaining, but she took on the role as a favor to her brother. In later years, she would have a lesbian relationship with a wealthy widow, exchanging erotic love letters that have been recently published in a book.
Yes, indeed. Rose Cleveland, a voracious lesbite.
Well, Rose Cleveland, our first gay first lady, perhaps. And a feminist before her time.
Who no doubt would have loved the works of Gertrude Stein. But let's talk about serious issues here. Civil service reform. The last 2 episodes in particular, well, even the last 3. Civil service reform. huge issue. Now, upon taking office, Cleveland pledges to enforce the Pendleton Civil Service Act of 1883, and he further pledges that no efficient federal employee would be removed from his job on partisan grounds. He stated, quote, "If I were addressing none but party friends, I should deem it entirely proper to remind them that, though the coming administration is to be democratic, a due regard for the people's interest does not permit faithful party work to be always rewarded by appointment to office." However, the Democratic Party had not controlled federal patronage since before the Civil War, and by now, Democrats are ravenous for appointments. They're salivating. And Cleveland is inundated by a flood of relentless office seekers, and he professes that, quote, "they haunt me in my dreams."
That's right. His frustrations prompted him to exclaim, quote, "My God, what is there in this office that any man should want to get into it?"
Yeah.
He is frustrated by the presidency, as many presidents have been with the filling of offices. He would receive praise from reform-minded Republicans at the beginning of his term, but as the term wore on, Democratic leaders made increasing demands for their share of patronage, and Cleveland would increasingly replace Republican office holders with Democrats. The Republican-controlled Senate sought to resist his efforts by evoking the remnants of the Tenure of Office Act.
That's right.
Which purported to require Senate consent for the dismissal of certain Senate-confirmed appointees. Cleveland refused to comply with the act and rejected, on the ground of executive privilege, a Senate request for documents relating to the dismissal of an Alabama district attorney. He stated, quote, "I am not responsible to the Senate, and I am unwilling to submit my actions and official conduct to them for judgment."
That's right.
The Senate voted to condemn the refusal, but Cleveland considered the episode a victory for the presidency. Later in his term, the Tenure of Office Act was fully repealed.
That's it. And of course, we've talked about the Tenure of Office Act, kind of a bullshit act.
Yeah.
From the get-go. And good riddance to it.
Yep.
Now, let's talk vetoes. The presidential veto. That's been a thing, but we are really going to see a new form of stew with Grover Cleveland. Now, he's already earned a reputation as the veto governor in New York, and he's going to continue that trend as president. Republicans control the Senate, but his own Democratic Party controls the House. Cleveland is sharply opposed to pork barrel spending and vetoes many spending bills. Congress also takes up the practice of passing private pension bills to grant pensions to individual veterans, a practice which Cleveland sharply opposes. The proposed recipients would have already been rejected by the General Pension Bureau, and Cleveland felt that it was unfair for Congress to override that decision for certain politically favored veterans. Cleveland also recognizes that pensions are already a major drain on the public finances.
That's right, and some of the proposed pensions were pretty ridiculous, including one family's request for a pension based on the service of their son who drowned after deserting the army.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got Congress putting up a bill to give this one particular guy a pension, and Cleveland is just not, I'm not doing any of these. And he vetoed over 200 private pension bills.
Yeah.
Congress responded to these individualized vetoes by passing a bill providing pensions for all disabled veterans, but including disabilities not caused by military service. Cleveland vetoed that.
Yeah.
He also vetoed the Texas Seed Bill, a proposal to spend $100,000 to purchase seed for Texas farmers whose crops failed as a result of drought. In his veto message, he stated, quote, "I can find no warrant for such an appropriation in the Constitution, and I do not believe that the power and duty of the general government ought to be extended to the relief of individual suffering which is in no manner properly related to the public service or benefit. A prevalent tendency to disregard the limited mission of this power and duty should, I think, be steadfastly resisted, and to the end that the lesson should be constantly enforced, that though the people support the government should not support the people.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a ground for veto that goes back to James Madison.
Yeah.
Just not thinking that the general government of the entire Union has power to spend money on particular relief of particular disasters in isolated areas. It's much more of a rare thing by Cleveland's time that anyone takes that position anymore, but Cleveland taking it.
Yeah, that's just it. And in his 4-year term, Cleveland is going to issue 304 vetoes and 110 pocket vetoes. His 414 total vetoes were more than all 21 prior presidents combined. Only 4-term President FDR would issue more vetoes than Cleveland had done in a single term. Only 2 of Grover Cleveland's vetoes were overridden.
Wow. Yeah, he's thrown the veto around like never before. Cleveland as the 22nd president has the second most vetoes ever. Only FDR had more. And yeah, it's just incredible that he had more vetoes than all prior presidents combined.
Yeah, it really is.
Mm-hmm.
He is, and I've said it before, he's wielding it like a sword. Mm-hmm. He's wielding it like a battle axe. Grover Cleveland. The bachelor president. But he's not going to remain a bachelor for too much longer, James.
Nope. He's a very, very eligible bachelor now that he's president.
Indeed he is. The year is 1886. Cleveland is often visited by Oscar Folsom's widow, Emma Folsom, and her daughter, Frances, and rumors begin to swirl that Cleveland was going to propose to old widow Emma Folsom. But when Frances graduated college and turned 21 during the first year of his presidency, Cleveland proposed to her. I have said it before, and I'll say it again. Grover Cleveland meets up with Emma Folsom and says, "How about that, daughter? Hubba, hubba."
Well, how about her? Cleveland first met her when she was an infant, and he was 27 years old, a friend of her father.
That's right.
He bought her a baby carriage. He doted on her as a child. She knew him as Uncle Cleve.
Yes.
When Oscar Folsom once asked Cleveland if he intended to get married, he said, quote, "I'm just waiting for my wife to grow up."
Yes, that is something.
Mm-hmm.
So Grover Cleveland, essentially a 27-year-old, beginning to groom an infant.
Well, she was, about 8 years old when her father died. Cleveland named administrator of his estate. He is basically her legal guardian because he's administering his father's estate and taking responsibility for the family's well-being.
That's it, and this is where things get perfectly normal.
Yep. Well, when Frances goes off to college, he very properly asked and received her mother's permission to correspond with her. That correspondence culminated in his proposal of marriage. Because by the time he's president, he figures he can do whatever he wants.
That's right.
He's very eligible. Hey, he's president. He's a great match for any young girl.
Yes.
Including one that he has known since she was a baby.
That's it. And Frances says yes. The engagement is kept secret until 5 days before the wedding. And the 49-year-old sitting president marries the 21-year-old in the Blue Room of the White House.
Yep. First White House wedding.
That's it.
Of a president.
And this is also going to earn Cleveland the #1 spot on our list of the top 5 presidential cradle robbers. But surprising to modern sensibilities, the nation was not scandalized by the match. No. Indeed, the new Mrs. Cleveland became incredibly popular.
Yep. They loved her. She was characterized as a beauty, shapely, and, quote, full bosom.
Well, you always want the full bosomed.
That's right.
As opposed to the half bosomed, or the quarter bosomed.
Go with the full. Frances decorated the White House. She held 2 receptions each week, sometimes greeting as many as 8,000 people. She was much more graceful in social situations than her husband, who was often awkward. She's the total package as a first lady, and as she's the youngest first lady we've had.
That's it.
Pretty surprisingly that she took to this role so effectively, despite her youth. Everyone loved her. The New York Times said, quote...
And, of course, we could believe the New York Times.
Yeah. Probably the same writer who wrote the cocaine article we mentioned earlier.
Perhaps.
But they wrote, quote, other presidents have shared the executive mansion with wives whose personal attractiveness, accomplishments, wit, and tact have commanded admiration, but not in one of all the wives of the presidents have the whole people manifested more interest than they do in the present lady of the White House. Her youth, beauty, grace, animation, and unaffected cordiality are irresistible.
Frank Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
A popular first lady.
Yeah, her birth name was Frank, named after an uncle, I believe. She took on the more feminized version, Frances, although Frank was actually her legal name.
Indeed.
And she was a pretty big asset to Cleveland politically. I think one of his opponents griped, like, man, it's going to be a lot harder to beat Cleveland with Mrs. Cleveland on his side. And it really kind of softened his image a lot.
Well, we've talked about sometimes there's a polar opposition. James and Dolly Madison.
Mm-hmm.
James and Sarah Polk. We've mentioned it in War. We'll get to the episode later, but Grace and Calvin Coolidge. Mm-hmm. This seems to be another one of those.
Yeah. Yeah, and especially after that whole, sex scandal during the election and just all the kind of things that were said about him, this really softened his image, and people can see, like, a gentler side of Cleveland, going around with his very attractive wife that everybody loves.
That's it.
And he really, he was really happy with her as well.
Absolutely. They're a strong couple.
Mm-hmm.
Let's move on to issues of policy.
Yep.
Silver currency. This is a major economic issue at the time. Now, many Western Republicans and Southern Democrats, especially farmers, favored increasing the silver currency as a means of expanding the money supply and relieving debt. Northeastern manufacturing interests, however, opposed silver currency and favored the gold-backed dollar. Silver, cheaper than gold, and silver currency would weaken the dollar and cause inflation. This brings us back to the Hayes administration a little bit, James. The Bland-Allison Act, passed over Hayes's veto, requires the federal government to coin a certain amount of silver currency. Now, during Cleveland's presidency, silver advocates seek to amend the act to require an unlimited amount of silver coinage, while gold advocates, they want to repeal it altogether.
That's right. And you got Cleveland, he's a conservative Northeasterner. He's a staunch supporter of sound money. He opposes silver and favors the gold standard. His Treasury Department tried to limit the amount of silver being coined, and he favored a bill to repeal the Bland-Allison Act. That bill is going to be defeated, but so is a pro-silver bill that would have uncapped silver coinage. So the status quo on silver is maintained, but the gold-silver debate would continue, and it would remain a major issue in national politics and in Cleveland's future.
That's right, there's going to be a lot more of that coming up. As to Cleveland's economic policy, Cleveland is going to sign into law the Interstate Commerce Act, which creates the Interstate Commerce Commission, and this is going to introduce regulations of railroad rates. The regulations were intended to create fairness for small businesses and farmers by barring railroads from charging special discounted rates to big businesses. However, the commission lacked sufficient enforcement powers, and the issue would not be resolved until Theodore Roosevelt's administration.
That's right. Cleveland's Interior Department declared that railroads had forfeited 81 million acres of public land grants by failing to extend their rail lines as agreed, and that land was returned to the government. Cleveland also signed into law a bill creating the Department of Agriculture, and he appointed the first Secretary of Agriculture.
That's right, a brand new department and a new cabinet position.
Yeah.
He's also going to sign the Hatch Act, which provides significant funding for agricultural research meant to improve food production. Cleveland also recognizes growing tensions between labor and capitalists. He's going to send a special message to Congress calling for a commission of labor to arbitrate and settle disputes between laborers and employers. But Congress is going to fail to act on his recommendation.
Well, let's take a look at Cleveland's foreign policy. In 1884, the United States had sent representatives to the Berlin Conference, in which European powers discussed arrangements for the partitioning and sharing of colonial interests in Africa. The conference led to a treaty that would grant certain free trade rights to countries that signed off on it, but Cleveland withdrew the treaty from consideration by the Senate. Germany, Belgium, and other European powers were making aggressive efforts to obtain colonial possessions, and some Americans believed the United States should be flexing its imperial muscles as well. Cleveland was opposed to any efforts to make the United States an imperial power. He observed a rather isolationist foreign policy and pledged to avoid entangling alliances with foreign powers.
Indeed, and this is something that Woodrow Wilson would later claim to be doing.
Yeah. Well, a lot will change between Cleveland and Wilson in terms of the United States and imperialism.
Absolutely it will.
Another little incident for Cleveland, back in 1878, in a treaty, the United States had pledged to defend the independence of the Pacific island archipelago of Samoa. Britain and Germany, however, were both interested in Samoa, and in 1886, Germany replaced the Samoan king with a puppet ruler and then threatened to go to war with Samoa when some Germans were killed in a rebellion. Cleveland sent 3 warships to Samoa to keep the peace and obtained Germany's agreement to seek a diplomatic solution. A deal that was concluded after Cleveland left office established a joint protectorate over Samoa by the U.S., Germany, and Britain.
Well, Germans' promises are always pretty solid.
Yep. Just ask Joseph Stalin.
Or Neville Chamberlain.
Yep.
Moving on to military policy, Cleveland appointed a board of fortifications that made recommendations for a $127 million construction program to upgrade the nation's coastal defenses. Most of the recommendations were adopted and construction began on enhanced fortifications, much of which would remain in place until being further upgraded during World War II. Cleveland also continued the Arthur administration's policy of modernizing the U.S. Navy. which had fallen into disrepair and remained reliant on outdated wooden warships. His administration completed the construction of 4 steel warships begun under Arthur and ordered 16 additional steel warships, while canceling contracts to construct inferior ships. We're bringing that Navy into line.
Yep. Well, Cleveland, the first Democratic president since before the Civil War. His Republican predecessors had appointed a lot of African Americans to federal patronage jobs. What's Cleveland going to do? Well, not so much. Frederick Douglass would remain in office as recorder of deeds for the District of Columbia, and when he resigned, Cleveland appointed an African American judge from New York to replace him. This would be his only significant appointment of an African American, and his fellow Democrats were outraged by it.
Yeah.
How dare you appoint even one African American?
Yeah. Still, at this point, Jesus.
Well, Cleveland is going to produce further outrage in the North when he signed off on his war secretary's proposal to return captured Confederate battle flags to southern states. It was intended as a gesture of reconciliation, but Union veterans took it as an insult.
Yeah. Those were captured, to just hand them back over after the bloodletting. Kind of a slap in the face.
Yeah, a lot of people made a lot out of that issue. It was a pretty unforced error by the Cleveland administration.
Yeah, and it's probably something that aided Benjamin Harrison a little bit in his campaign that'll be coming up. But
spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert indeed.
Well, speaking of enlightened racial attitudes.
Yes.
You recall 1882, President Arthur signed into law the Chinese Exclusion Act, which barred the immigration of Chinese laborers to the United States for 10 years. Labor unions had lobbied heavily for the legislation, believing that American workers were disadvantaged by the influx of Chinese immigrants willing to work for low wages, particularly on Western railroads and mines.
That's just it.
When asked to comment, American workers said,
"They took our jobs!
They took our jobs! Yep, Arthur had vetoed an earlier draft of the bill calling for a 20-year ban, but Cleveland signed a bill extending the 10-year ban for an additional 10 years. He also signed a bill banning Chinese immigrants who left the United States from returning. While he was initially sympathetic to the plight of Chinese laborers, he eventually concluded that assimilation was not realistic.
That's it. Upon signing the bill, Cleveland stated, quote, "The experiment of blending the social habits and mutual race idiosyncrasies of the Chinese laboring classes with those of the great body of the people of the United States has been proved by the experience of 20 years to be in every sense unwise, impolitic, and injurious to both nations. Restrictions on Chinese immigration would remain in place until 1943, when China became a U.S. ally during the Second World War."
That's right.
And let's just keep running the gauntlet of shit and go on to Native American policy under President Cleveland.
Yep, well, at the outset of his presidency, Cleveland reversed an executive order issued by Arthur that would have opened up 4 million acres of Indian lands in the Dakota Territory to white settlement. Cleveland believed that order violated treaties with the Indian tribes and sent in the army to enforce the treaties and keep white settlers out.
Excellent!
So far, so good. Cleveland also signed into law the Dawes Act, a major piece of legislation that established a commission to visit Indian reservations and suggest reforms. Sounds pretty good. It also enabled Indians to receive American citizenship and individual allotments of land, whereas previously tribal land was held collectively in trust by the federal government.
Wow.
Sounds good. A conference of Indian leaders said they supported that, but a lot of Indians not on board. It's kind of suspicious.
Indeed.
We're going to give you American citizenship, and we're going to give you your own land.
Yeah.
Well,
if it sounds too good to be true.
How could that go wrong? Well, Cleveland was among the well-meaning reformers who sincerely believed that the welfare of Indians depended upon their assimilation with white society. So, giving them citizenship, giving them their own land, that's just part of that deal. And while the Dawes Act did give individual Indians control of land, it also made them targets for white land speculators.
That's just it, James. And by the time the act was repealed in 1934, Native Americans had lost control of about 2/3 of the land they held at the time of its passage.
Mm-hmm.
A great shame.
Indeed.
But there's tariffs.
Yep, tariffs.
We gotta talk tariffs. Big issues of the day. Tariffs, they had become a defining issue towards the end of Cleveland's term. Manufacturing interests favored high tariffs that protected American industries from competition abroad. Such tariffs, however, interfered with free trade and often resulted in higher prices for American consumers. At the time Cleveland was elected, tariffs were so high...
How high were they?
They were so high that the federal government was operating at a huge surplus.
Wow. Sounds good, but what are we going to do with all that extra money, and is it fair to be taking it?
Indeed.
Generally, Republicans favored the high tariffs, while Democrats wanted to lower them. Cleveland had not really emphasized the tariff issue during the 1884 campaign, despite his conservative pro-business credentials, including his solid support for the gold standard. He would stand with most Democrats in favor of reduced tariffs and increased free trade. This is where his stance in favor of saving government money really comes into play.
Indeed.
Because that government surplus continued to grow, and his belief in small government and against misusing public funds is going to keep strengthening his opposition to these high tariffs.
That's absolutely right. And in 1886, a bill to lower tariffs fails to pass Congress, and tariffs become a huge issue in the midterm elections of that year. Democrats are going to go on to lose 15 seats in the House. Tariffs are becoming the major issue dividing the parties, and Cleveland is determined to be his party's standard bearer. That's going to bring us to December 1887, where Cleveland devotes his entire State of the Union message to the tariff issue, stating, quote, "When we consider that the theory of our institutions guarantees to every citizen the full enjoyment of all the fruits of his industry and enterprise with only such dedication as may be his share toward the careful and economical maintenance of the government which protects him, it is plain that the exaction of more than this is indefensible extortion and a culpable betrayal of American fairness and justice. The public treasury, which should only exist as a conduit conveying the people's tribute to its legitimate objects of expenditure, becomes a hoarding place for money needlessly withdrawn from trade and the people's use, thus crippling our national energies, suspending our country's development, preventing investment in productive enterprise, threatening financial disturbance, and inviting schemes of public plunder."
Wow.
Forceful words.
Cleveland throwing down the gauntlet on tariffs, and a bill to reduce tariffs would be proposed, but it became so watered down in the House that it would have only reduced the tariff rates from 47% to 40%, and then it died in the Republican-controlled Senate.
That's it.
But tariffs would be the major issue in the 1888 presidential election. That brings us to June 1888, the Democratic National Convention in St. Louis unanimously nominating Grover Cleveland on the first ballot.
That's right.
To seek a second term as president. Former Ohio Senator Alan Thurman nominated for vice president.
Yeah, let's not forget that Thomas Hendricks is dead.
Yep. The Republican convention ended up selecting a compromise candidate, former Indiana Senator Benjamin Harrison, grandson of President William Henry Harrison and great-grandson of Declaration of Independence signer Benjamin Harrison.
That's right.
His running mate, New Yorker Levi Morton.
That's it. And, you know, campaigns are different in this time. Cleveland, not personally going to participate in the campaign, and Harrison himself is going to stay home and address supporters from his porch. Republicans are going to run an aggressive and energized campaign, raising huge sums of money from big business interests by emphasizing the tariff issue. While Francis Cleveland's image was a major asset to Cleveland's campaign, Republicans spread rumors that Cleveland would drunkenly beat his wife.
Yeah, I think Francis Cleveland had to come out and make a statement that that wasn't true and that all women should be so lucky to have a husband who treats them as hers treats her. But such is what gets said in campaigns. Republicans, one of their moves, they publicized the, quote, Murchison letter, where a California Republican had written to the British ambassador to the United States posing as a British immigrant and asking who he should vote for. The ambassador ill-advisedly replied that he should vote for Cleveland, and this letter was used to imply that Cleveland was in the pocket of British free trade interests, and it hurt him among Irish voters.
Ouch.
Who are not really fans of Britain.
And perhaps more importantly, James, the New York Democratic Party, pretty divided. You got the Tammany Hall machine, and you got pro-Cleveland supporters. And they are not seeing eye to eye.
No.
Cleveland declines to endorse the incumbent Democratic governor who is running for re-election. That's saying something.
Yeah. The Republicans, they're more organized and focused. Democrats running kind of a lackluster campaign. Cleveland not participating. Cleveland not really caring too much, it seems, about getting elected again. He kind of felt like he wouldn't mind leaving if there was someone else to be nominated, but he's going to do what he needs to do for the party. But
that's just it. And with over 11 million votes cast on Election Day, Cleveland is going to win the popular vote by just under 100,000.
sounds like a better result than last time.
Indeed. But, Harrison beat him in 2 swing states that he had carried in 1884, New York and Indiana.
Uh-oh.
As a result, Harrison prevails in the Electoral College 238 to 168. While the Republicans were more unified and ran a more organized and better funded campaign, there may have been other factors at play, James.
That's right, the 1888 election has been called one of the most corrupt in history, and there are indications that corrupt practices, including vote buying, repeat voting, and importing out-of-state voters, were rampant, particularly in New York and Indiana. Harrison's campaign manager, Pennsylvania Senator Matthew Quay, notoriously said that Harrison, quote, will never know how close many men were compelled to approach the gates of the penitentiary to make him president.
Indeed.
Wow.
And so, Grover Cleveland has lost.
That's right.
He's going home. March 4th, 1889, Cleveland accompanies Harrison to the inauguration. It is a rainy day, and Cleveland actually holds an umbrella over Harrison whilst he delivers his inaugural address. Very gallant act.
Right.
And as Frances Cleveland leaves the White House that day, she tells a staff member, quote, "I want you to take good care of all the furniture and ornaments in the house, for I want to find everything just as it is now when we come back again." When asked when she would return, she responded, "We are coming back 4 years from today."
Wow.
A confident Frank Cleveland.
Quite a prediction.
Indeed, and maybe bolstered by the fact that Cleveland did indeed win the popular vote.
That's right.
And, we'll touch on this in a later episode, but Cleveland wins the popular vote 3 times running.
Well, that might be a little clue as to whether Frances Cleveland's prediction comes true, as well as this episode being called Grover Cleveland Part 1.
Indeed.
That does it for Grover Cleveland as 22nd President of the United States.
That's right.
But that might not be all to be said for President Grover Cleveland.
That's right. We're not going to dive into any more of the life of Grover Cleveland at this juncture.
Yep, because we've got President Benjamin Harrison to take care of next.
That's right.
And if something else happens to make Frances Cleveland's prediction come true, well, we'll just have to deal with the 24th president in episode 24.
That's just it. But as it is, we do have to take a word from our sponsors.
Thanks for listening.
The Dead Presidents Podcast is brought to you in part by N.J. Bielenberg, who publishes this important notice. $500 reward. I will pay the reward of $500 for information and evidence that will lead me to the conviction of any person setting fire to any of my sheep camps or in any way unlawfully pursuing or molesting my sheep grazing on the public domain. Listeners, if you want to make a quick $500, keep your eyes open for the low-life pieces of trash who've been going around burning N.J. Bielenberg's sheep camps and having sex with his sheep.
Well, I think he just means molesting as in interfering with, not necessarily sexually molesting.
Huh. But it doesn't necessarily exclude the possibility of sexual molestation, does it?
I guess not.
Listen, you sheep fuckers, you screwheads. N.J. Bielenberg is a man who will not take it anymore. Does he have the hottest sheep in town? Sure, no question. Do you get to have your way with those sheep just because they're grazing on the public domain? Absolutely not. This $500 reward will have the whole town watching out for you, so the funny business better stop now. That's a message from our sponsor, N.J. Bielenberg.
Now a word from our sponsor, the Copper Queen Mining Company, which publishes this important notice. $500 reward. The Copper Queen Mining Company hereby offers $500 for the arrest and conviction of the person or persons who brutally murdered Nicholas McCormick on August 25th, 1887, about 3 miles from Bisbee, Arizona. Listeners, there's $500 on the table for whoever helps capture the killer or killers of Nicholas McCormick. That's a pretty sizable reward. If Nicholas McCormick had been murdered painlessly in his sleep, they probably wouldn't be offering this much. But as we all know, Nicholas McCormick was brutally murdered, gunned down in cold blood on the road between Bisbee and the White-tailed Deer Mine. Just a 75-year-old man minding his own business. There's no call for that. We all read about the coroner's inquest, and we all read the names of the 2 Mexicans strongly suspected of the deed, and how they disappeared into the San Jose Mountains without a trace. We here at the Dead Presidents Podcast are thinking about rustling up a posse and heading up into those mountains after them. So if you've got hair on your nuts and you want a cut of that $500 reward, grab your guns and ride out with us. That's a message from our sponsor, the Copper Queen Mining Company.
And now, back to the show. And we're back, and ready to leave the penultimate word on Grover Cleveland to your favorite band and ours, the Constitutionalists.
Here are the Constitutionalists with their incredible song, Grover Cleveland.
Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Public office is a public trust. Office holders are the agents of the people, not their masters. In the scheme of our national government, the presidency is preeminently the people's office. I am president of all the people, good, bad, or indifferent. Recognizes the dignity of labor and the fact that honor lies in honest toil. The waste of public money is a crime against the citizen. Men and times change, but principles never. Whatever you do, tell the truth. Unswerving loyalty to duty, constant devotion to truth, and a clear conscience will overcome every discouragement